to hold, 'cause I'm made of stardust, and my soul can reach beyond the stars.
We are live.
Well, welcome everybody to our session. This is B4 in the program, the Honey Scholarship Paper Session, and we're blessed today to have the formal winners of the Honey Family Scholarship, and each of them will talk for about 10 minutes. And if you're interested, it gives you a couple of minutes after each speaker. If you're interested in asking a question, just drop it in the chat box, and we'll make sure the speaker gets an invitation to respond if we have time. And if anyone is running a little over time, I might just pop in and just remind everybody of the time here. And so our first speaker, and as the program notes, the winner of the scholarship is Adiba Hakeem, and so she will talk first. So I'll turn it over to Adiba.
Thank you, Geoff. So before I begin, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the International Network on Personal Meaning and the Honey Family Foundation for instituting this award. I also thank Dr. Wong and the panel of adjudicators for selecting my submission. I am very much humbled to have the opportunity to present the paper here. So I will share my screen. Please let me know if it's working. All good? Right. So it's a theoretical paper. It's entitled "To Flourish in Catastrophic Times, the COVID-19 Pandemic as a Catalyst to the Discovery of Meaning and Purpose." I will essentially be trying to deconstruct the binary of suffering and flourishing against the backdrop of the pandemic. And through the lens of existential positive psychology, the paper explores how individuals may transcend the existential crisis by adopting and cultivating certain attitudes and virtues. There's no doubt that the pandemic paints a very grim picture. It has disrupted the way people live across the world at the micro or individual level, as well as the macro or systemic level, and impediments in daily routine, mobility, and thereby autonomy over an extended period of time have created changes in lifestyle. And regardless of their socioeconomic standing, people are forced into new ways of being. And the underprivileged especially bear a heavier brunt. They have to grapple with disrupted means of livelihood that overarch their other concerns. And essentially the individual suffers nested within larger social structures and systems of economy, industry, education, health infrastructure, all that are overwhelmed at best and crumbling at worst. The magnitude of the pandemic and its scale of impact have thrown people into an existential crisis. An increase in mental health concerns have been reported across countries. Anxiety around mortality and isolation is encountered on an acute and day-to-day basis. The preoccupation with existential concerns and the nature of the concerns may vary with age. Younger people, for instance, with high hopes regarding their education and career may find themselves at roadblocks in their pursuit of goals and personal growth. And uncertainty and hopelessness about an obscure future may evoke deeper existential anxiety and meaninglessness in life. The disruption of ways of functioning that we are accustomed to, and the breakdown of seemingly reliable and well-oiled systems evoke a sense of lack of control and predictability regarding our affairs. Positive psychologists have explored the process of adaptation and recovery or realignment in the context of the pandemic through constructs like resilience and hardiness. Studies have suggested that practices like meaning making, benefit finding, and gratitude may help improve well being in these times. This paper leans on existential positive psychology, and it posits that suffering and flourishing need not be dichotomous, and that suffering may even act as a conduit for flourishing. It proposes an approach to enable flourishing despite the suffering by building on certain pragmatic concepts from the field. Finding meaning and personal growth from a place of existential angst requires us to confront these anxieties as opposed to superficial coping. One must embrace the suffering and the condition of thrownness in order to turn the adversity into growth opportunities and live an authentic or meaning centered life. I come to my key proposition that the suffering can be transcended by embracing courage, flexibility, and creativity. Let's look at courage first. Now, we have been forced to realign ourselves to change circumstances. Polly and colleague have put a question quite nicely. If you can't control the wind, you have to adjust your sail. But in order for this realignment and reconstruction to happen, the individual has to allow himself or herself to be vulnerable. And this is where I find Paul Tillich's concept of courage to be very relevant. It takes existential courage to be anxious, to suffer, to be vulnerable, and to choose who and what to be amidst all this uncertainty. Fowers and colleagues have identified courage as a key virtue in outliving the pandemic. Next, by adopting an attitude of flexibility and openness, one is able to let go of certain restrictive schemas and fixed patterns of functioning. And this allows for new ways of being. And instead of living a life that lacks authenticity, where you don't live to your fullest potential, the individual, in adopting flexibility, then undergoes a process of discovery of meaning and purpose in life. And in this sense, the pandemic and the suffering it presents acts as a catalyst for personal growth. On to creativity. In circumstances that require us to push our boundaries, creativity is a character strength that we can capitalize upon. Current studies are documenting how people are overcoming obstacles and devising solutions at work, interpersonal, and other fronts through creative ideation. For example, the disruption of traditional teaching learning environments. It has created entirely new systems and modes of imparting education, and stakeholders across the world have expanded their repertoire of skills. And when you look at macro systems as well, beyond the individual, the pandemic has forced innovation and acceleration across private and public sector systems and development agencies. Certainly, exercising creativity enables us to visualize new possibilities and avenues. It can be transformative and gives new meaning to life. The discovery of meaning, newfound goals, and purpose is instrumental. It enables individuals to adopt a eudaimonic life and to flourish, to live the good life that is pleasant, engaged, meaningful, achieving, and connected. And in conclusion, as put forward by Van Tongeren and Showalter Van Tongeren, the suffering that has been brought about by the pandemic has brought to our immediate consciousness certain existential anxieties that impair our ability to find meaning in life. To be able to realign to this changed world, one must embrace the suffering. And it takes existential courage to reconstruct what it means to be and to live. Allowing oneself to be vulnerable and engaging with this angst gives way to discovering newfound meaning and purpose in life. An attitude of flexibility and openness makes new ways of being, and creativity fosters visualizing of possibilities and avenues, and through this painstaking experience of realigning and rediscovery, the individual then transcends the suffering and is able to flourish. Thank you for listening to me.
Well, thanks, Adiba. And I don't see any questions immediately in the chat box. So I'm wondering if Yun, would you like to go next?
Oh. Can you repeat that again, Joe? Oh, can you hear me? Okay. Okay. Let me then share my screen if I can. Hold on. Hold on. Okay. Are you able to see my screen? Good. Okay. Hi. Good morning, everyone. So from India, we're going back here in the West Coast. I am doing this presentation from Claremont, California. I'm June Kabigting. I'm a PhD student of positive organizational psychology here at the Claremont Graduate University. So this is actually my first ever academic presentation. So I'm both feeling nervous and also excited. So which is in an excellent segue to my topic, which is around the issue of paradox. So today I'll be discussing responsibility as an enabler of human consciousness and flourishing using the paradox theory. So this presentation will argue that the role of responsibility as a unifying condition, which is akin to Aristotle's phronesis or master virtue, to keep human consciousness from atrophying and in the process help achieve individual, institutional, and global flourishing and well-being. Specifically, the presentation or the paper will propose the use of paradox theory and the paradoxical mindset in finding the balance or optimum combination among the three fundamental conditions of human consciousness that are needed to flourish in everyday life. So the paper uses an old concept such as the paradox to find a new way of application to existential positive psychology. The use of the paradoxical mindset can help advance PP 2.0's ultimate goal of optimal human functioning, flourishing, and well-being through the recognition and harnessing of the dialectic nature and tendencies of people, organizations, and society itself. So to just start with, let's first define what consciousness in this paper refers to. It basically refers to the information that people have of their experiences across different modalities such as temporal, spatial, affective, and also cognitive. And in this, Csikszentmihalyi, one of the founding fathers of positive psychology, proposed three conditions of human consciousness that are needed to flourish in everyday life. The first one is about freedom, which is to decide what consciousness means, and then a hope, the positive outlook of the future, and flow, the enjoyable or optimal experience. He argued that keeping human consciousness from atrophying needs to be a concern of governments and their people to prevent their communities from suffering, decline, and death. So, but the question is, are these conditions that Csikszentmihalyi proposed enough, to indeed keep human consciousness from atrophying? Could unifying condition akin to Aristotle's concept of phrenesis or master virtue be the answer to keep the marriage of these primary conditions healthy and robust? Well, in 2019, Wong posited that responsibility as the master virtue, making all other virtues in the values in action classification system. And likewise, in this presentation, I propose that the responsibility as the fourth condition of human consciousness that can be operationalized through the lens of paradox theory, and which can enable human and societal flourishing itself. So let's define what responsibility is. So responsibility in this context, refers to the obligation or to satisfactorily perform a task, whether on an individual, organization, societal, or governmental levels of operationalization. It is different from accountability, as accountability refers to the liability for ensuring a task is satisfactorily done or not. So in the context of this presentation, the scope of responsibility primarily covers attributional or operational domains, rather than that of the moral, ethical, or legal aspects of responsibility. So in short, there is an assumption in this paper that, or in this presentation, that when an action is done responsibly, it is something good, moral, ethical, and legal. So to enable responsibility to become a unifying condition amongst freedom, hope, and flow, as you can see from figure 1, a brief discussion about the concepts of paradox and paradox theory follows. So what is paradox theory? So Smith and Lewis first defined paradox as statements or elements that have seemingly contradictory nature or meaning, but exist simultaneously and persist over time. As such, they developed the concept of paradox theory, which is further conceptualized as a meta-theoretical framework that provides insights into the sources, nature, and outcomes of individual and organizational differences. So in their paper, they developed this figure, wherein these differences inevitably result to paradoxical tensions, which can be viewed as a dilemma or a trade-off, a compromise, or dialectic. Well, at least the Hegelian dialectic, and or as a paradox, which affects the kind of decision goal one has to resolve the tension. So for the purposes of this presentation, we will just view these tensions as a paradox by using the contrasting elements together instead of choosing one over the other, so that it can result in a broader range of behavioral options people can choose to make informed decision. So in short, a paradoxical view of tension adopts an and both approach rather than an either or if then approach, that is used in contingency theory. So having said this, so how can we then operationalize responsibility and through the lens of the paradox theory? So using paradox theory, using paradox in theory in operationalizing how responsibility can become a unifying condition to keep human consciousness from atrophying, we can juxtapose responsibility with freedom, hope, and flow. So, for example, in this freedom responsibility dyad, a person with low levels of freedom and responsibility would experience stagnation, atrophy, or dependence on someone else. For a person with a high degree of freedom but a low level of responsibility, this person may become independent of others, but may also result to entitlement, chaos, or potential abuse of freedom. So, in the current context of the pandemic, this is you can probably explain vaccine hesitancy, using this freedom responsibility dyad. So conversely, if a person has a low degree of freedom but a high level of responsibility, then rebellion, disobedience, unrest, slavery, exploitation, and codependence on someone else may also result. So when a person has levels on both high responsibility and freedom, then you have amazement, thriving, flourishing, and interdependence. So using this approach, we can actually do that as well, for the other two conditions of human consciousness, which is enjoyment and also or and hope. So but I'm not going to discuss more of that. But so this analysis just clearly showed that the power of paradox theory in providing a broader set of outcomes or behaviors that people and governments can become aware of, so that they in turn can explore appropriate interventions to prevent these conditions of human consciousness from atrophying. So so this is theoretical paper. So the next step would be really to do an empirical study about this. Because although the concept of responsibility, freedom, hope, or flow and paradox are not new by themselves, the relationships, interactions, or connections among these conditions, when combined and operationalized together, are worth further investigating by conducting more empirical studies and scientific inquiry. For example, research on the role of responsibility in mediating, moderating, or both, the three other conditions of freedom, hope, and flow would advance our understanding of this proposed construct. And in so doing, I've developed some structural equation models here that, so for example, this one, represents moderated mediation model where responsibility mediates freedom, hope, and flow on a moderated level to enable human consciousness that leads to flourishing. Another structural equation model in here is that it's a simultaneous mediator moderator model wherein responsibility simultaneously mediates and moderates freedom, hope, and flow to enable human consciousness that leads to flourishing. So in conclusion, regardless of the outcome of the proposed studies, both models further conceptually demonstrate how paradox theory can be used in enabling the flourishing of human consciousness through a unifying condition that is called responsibility. And that's it. Thank you very much. And if you do have any questions, you can either type it in the chat or send me an email. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Jen. And I'm just looking, I don't see any questions immediately here. But I do notice we have Jonah has joined us. And,
Hi, everyone.
There we go.
Hi. Yes. Thanks, Dr. Thompson. Hi, everyone. This is Jonah Lee. I am a current predoctoral psychology intern, so you can see a husky in my background, but it's not a real husky. So let me share my screen real quick. Can you see my screen? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So, so this poster presentation is testing a moderation model, especially the moderating role of personal meaning on the relationship between anti-mattering and suicide ideation. So we know that suicide behavior is a major health risk in the United States or worldwide. So according to some data, between 1999 and 2019, suicide rates has increased about 33%. And as a positive or existential psychologist, we really want to think about how we can make a difference to protect or decrease the suicide rate. And so positive psychology 2.0 would be very insightful for us to learn about how we can make a difference. So in this paper, I borrowed a conceptual framework from Jonah's interpersonal theory of suicide. According to Jonah, suicide ideation is partly result from an unmet interpersonal need, including perceived burdensomeness to others and failed belongingness. One would feel that they are alienated or isolated from a social group. And this theory has been supported by systematic reviews of multiple experimental, correlational, longitudinal studies. So specifically in the context of this study, I conceptualized anti-mattering as an unmet interpersonal need. While Rosenberg would consider mattering as one's experience of life as being significant, on the other hand, anti-mattering is about one's experience as like, I'm not important, I'm invisible, right? And so this would be not just an opposite end of a spectrum, but really they are two different constructs. For example, like meaningfulness and existential meaninglessness. It would be meaninglessness would engender existential anxiety, but not existential meaningfulness. So I highlight the importance of the distinction between them. So I conceptualize anti-mattering as an unmet interpersonal need to predict suicide ideation. Specifically, borrowing Wong's meaning hypothesis, personal meaning would serve as a moderator. Specifically, he highlights that meaning can serve a very protective role in terms of extreme or difficult situations. So I propose two hypotheses. The first hypothesis would be that anti-mattering and perceived personal meaning would be positively and negatively correlate to suicide ideation respectively. The second hypothesis would be that it would be mainly the moderation hypothesis, like meaning would moderate the link between anti-mattering and suicide ideation. So I collect data from college students and then we test two hypotheses. We found support for the first hypothesis. So you can see from table 1, anti-mattering would be negatively related to personal meaning and positively related to suicide ideation. In terms of the moderation hypothesis, I use process macro, SPSS tool, and use Johnson-Neiman procedure specifically to probe the exact significant moderation effect. So we can see that from figure 1, that anti-mattering was significantly and positively related to suicide ideation, only at low levels of personal meaning, but not high levels of personal meaning. In other words, if one has low presence of personal meaning and they experience anti-mattering, like I'm not mattered by a group of people surrounding me, they are more likely to experience suicide ideation, suicidal thoughts. However, if one has a high levels of meaning, even though they might be rejected by others, for example, like the life experience of Viktor Frankl, they can still be resilient against some suicidal ideations. And so this is the first study to really examine the moderation effect, especially considering anti-mattering as a predictor of suicide ideation. Indeed, anti-mattering is a relatively new construct in the literature, and definitely more and more research will be needed. One next step to extend the finding of this study would be an intervention. For example, how would be some meaning-oriented interventions can be used to help teenagers or people in severe suicide situation would become stabilized, right? And so from Dr. Paul Wong's insights like the ABCDE and PO strategies and meaning-centered therapy would be some great tools and concrete pathways for clinicians to really intervene and help save lives. And for researchers, they can have some experimental and interventional studies to test and provide evidence for those interventions. So thanks very much for your attention and time for listening to my presentation. Because of time, I may not be able to go through every detail of this study, but please feel free to reach out to me, and I am going to put my email address in the chat box. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jonah. I'm just checking the chat box here. I don't see anything immediately. I'm morning leave and going across the ocean again to Swansea with Jessica Mead here, is along with Jonah. Actually, won the third prize, although for second, third, I think you're all pretty outstanding personally. But at any rate, here's Jessica with our final official presentation.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here, especially among some of the amazing speakers that have been on. I'll share my screen quickly now. And start the presentation. Brilliant. So I'm Jess. I'm from Swansea University in Wales in the UK, and today I'm going to talk to you about facilitators of post-traumatic growth. Human suffering is inevitable, and we need to come to terms with the fact that we will all suffer trauma in our lives, but if we can turn this suffering into something beautiful, then we have a sustainable approach to protecting our well-being. I would like to say that what I'm presenting to you today is a small part of a larger project, and I'm a small member of a larger team, and that team is the Biennial science team. So if you're interested in knowing more, please do connect with me either through the email that I provided in the Twitter or just through the platform. The platform is brilliant, by the way. Whoever's created it, I'm very impressed. So my PhD is predominantly focused on the creation of a new model of well-being called Biennial, and this model spans the individual, the community, and the environment. And a key part of this model is that it is sustainable, not only for ourselves, but for our communities and for our environment. And I won't delve into this model for the current presentation, but it's important for you to know where the theoretical underpinnings of the current study comes from. Professor Andrew Kemp is an invited speaker at this conference, and he will be talking to you later about the work that our team does, including our model of well-being. So it will give you a greater insight into our work. But back to the sustainable aspect of our model, we acknowledge the contributing role that adversity and trauma can play for our well-being. Without acknowledging this, no model can be sustainable. And post-traumatic growth is a key concept in this area. Paul Wong himself noted that it is vital to be able to accept and transcend suffering if we want sustainable approaches to well-being. So how can we do this? You can seek out a therapist to help walk you through the steps of experiencing post-traumatic growth after suffering a trauma, but you could also focus on strategies that you as an individual can adopt in your own time. And this can be done before any tragedy strikes, to prepare you with the tools to help facilitate post-traumatic growth when you do suffer. And the COVID-19 pandemic gave me a unique opportunity to research the impact of factors from my model of well-being on facilitating post-traumatic growth. So for the purpose of this study, I focused on 5 factors, which you can see on the right of the screen. These factors are physical activity, gratitude, tragic optimism, social support, and nature connection. I was interested to see whether these factors could facilitate or potentially facilitate post-traumatic growth. They are consistent with my previous study, Protectors of Wellbeing during the COVID-19 pandemic. In this study, I used these 5 factors in predicting well-being and found that they could predict up to 50% of the variance in well-being. And the reason why we chose these 5 factors is we felt they were exemplars of our model of well-being that spanned the individual, the community, and the environment. A short review of the model of well-being can be found on the left, and the references for these I'll put at the end of the presentation. Previous research has linked these 5 factors with post-traumatic growth, although for optimism, the focus has been on the traditional conceptualization of optimism, as opposed to Paul Wong's measure of tragic optimism. And the research linking post-traumatic growth and nature connection is quite limited and is not often explicitly researched. What I mean by this is sometimes nature has provided a context for other activities which was explicitly researched. Like one study researched the impact of hiking, but didn't necessarily delve into the nature aspect, but obviously it was in nature. So I'm delving into some new research areas as well as combining a bunch of existing research areas together to see if the combination of all of these factors can account for a large proportion of the variance in post-traumatic growth in my sample. And the idea that I'm sort of driving towards is that if these factors can account for a large proportion, we can start building on these factors, not only just for our current well-being, but to potentially help facilitate the process of post-traumatic growth when adversity does strike. So just some details. My study was a cross-sectional study in a UK-based cohort and consisted of 133 people, aged between 18 and 69 years old, and they were predominantly women. This data was collected between the months of November 2020 and February 2021. So for those of you who don't know, in the UK, we were in a strict lockdown during this period. As you can see, our sample did exhibit lower levels of post-traumatic growth compared with other studies, both during and pre-COVID. They had a mean score of 46, whereas many other studies do note scores within the 60s and 70s. But we pursue the analysis nonetheless. There's no definitive cutoff point for what is and what is not post-traumatic growth, and there are some studies published that are noting scores within the 30s. So controlling for age, gender, and socioeconomic status, I carried out a hierarchical regression. And for those who might be unfamiliar with this analysis, it's basically a fancy correlation, but it does control the presence of all the other variables in the model. And our results found that the variables, the physical activity, gratitude, tragic optimism, social support, and nature connection could account for up to 18% of the variance in post-traumatic growth scores. The two key variables which significantly contributed to this were gratitude and nature connection. And the role of gratitude in facilitating post-traumatic growth has received more attention than that of nature connection. For example, gratitude can help alter your perspective of your suffering. And when it comes to nature connection, this may be more of a surprise because it is less researched, but it showed that it had a greater impact on post-traumatic growth compared to more researched factors such as social support and optimism. A previous paper from our team has reported aspects of post-traumatic growth as a result of nature-based interventions, with nature increasing the experience of psychological flow, mindfulness, and transcendent emotions. The reference for that paper I will also provide at the end of my presentation. So it's great to know that gratitude and nature connection could potentially facilitate post-traumatic growth, but would this then have an impact on well-being? I carried out a mediation analysis to ask this question, with the predictor variables being the same as in the regression, which you can see on the right-hand side, and the outcome variable being well-being, and the mediator being post-traumatic growth. We found that these variables did directly and significantly predict well-being, but this relationship wasn't mediated by the impact that these variables were having on post-traumatic growth. This was not what we were expecting. We were expecting the influence of these variables on post-traumatic growth to cause an increase in well-being, but we didn't find this. We think that the reason for this is that the relationship between post-traumatic growth and well-being does strengthen over time, or at least previous papers seems to highlight that. So a follow-up of this study would be ideal to find out whether the influence of these variables on post-traumatic growth at time point 1 would subsequently improve well-being at time point 2. So to recap on what I've talked about, the ability to accept and transcend suffering is vital for sustainable well-being, within which a key research area is post-traumatic growth. I mentioned I created a new model of well-being, and we want this model to be sustainable. So do the factors within this model also potentially help facilitate post-traumatic growth? And yes, they do to some degree. We found that they accounted for up to 18% of the variance in scores, and nature, connection, and gratitude emerged as key factors. So we provided further evidence to the field linking gratitude and post-traumatic growth, and we provided a new contribution, newish, with the link between nature, connection, and post-traumatic growth. And whilst this does need to be replicated, it is interesting that these two variables emerge as key factors in facilitating or potentially facilitating post-traumatic growth over and above well-known influences such as social support. And back to why this is important, if we can preemptively start building these factors within ourselves before trauma occurs, we can be better equipped at facilitating our own post-traumatic growth at the point of adversity and beyond, allowing for the experience of suffering to contribute positively to our well-being. Both gratitude and nature connection can be built on through gratitude interventions such as the 3 Good Things activity and being more mindful and active in nature. And if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that human suffering is inevitable. So we need to start drawing benefits from it. We need to start bolstering ourselves with the psychological equipment, so to speak, that is needed to help facilitate this ability to accept and transcend suffering, and allow it to become part of who we are in a beautiful way. So I'd like to leave you with a picture of a small part of our team and some key references to refer you to. Please do get in touch with either myself or Andi. Thank you for listening to me.
Good. Well, we've got lots of time left over. If anyone has any questions. Okay. Well, I'll start off if that's okay. And this one's for Jessica, because I'm fascinated with this connection with nature variable. How do you have any insight into that? Why that might be so important?
I think both nature provides a context for other things that can support post-traumatic growth, such as social support and stuff, because a lot of group activities go on in nature, but also nature itself. If you are able to have that psychological and physical connection with nature, it does bring a sense of transcendent emotions. You're part of something bigger than yourself. Never mind the health benefits of being in nature as well, the physiological and biological health benefits. I think it provides everything really, both the context for all the other stuff that supports post-traumatic growth, but allowing a person to feel a part of something larger, part of something greater, be connected to the planet that we're on.
Thank you. The reason I ask is that with the pandemic, I'm absolutely certain, if history is any indication, that there will actually be major changes in society, and this back to nature seems to be a big component. People are, and I'm curious because you're at Swansea University. I'm actually stuck in the middle of a forest, and I'm not sure there are many more people than me have actually stepped foot in it. So very different, yet we're finding the same thing over here in Canada. So it's interesting.
Yeah, hopefully there will be some changes and some drive towards the importance of green spaces and getting out there in nature and stuff.
I have a question, Jeff.
Okay.
This would be for Florencio or June. I'm not sure what he goes by, but so June, I'm wondering, so you mentioned responsibility Was your did the metaphor you used for responsibility, was it a funnel? Was I correct in one of your slides? You showed it as sort of being like a funnel of sorts.
Yeah, I mean, responsibility serves as the funnel of hope, freedom, and flow. So so the metaphor is that responsibility itself, can mix these three conditions of human flourishing: hope, freedom, and flow. So which is similar to what Aristotle conceived practical wisdom as the master virtue. That so another metaphor is that I don't know if you guys like Lord of the Rings. So there is this one ring that binds them all. So to me, responsibility is that ring that binds, or that can bind the three conditions of human consciousness, that if activated or operationalized, can lead to flourishing and thriving.
Okay, thank you.
I should have used the Lord of the Rings metaphor. I love Tolkien. Thanks for that question, Daniel. If I may, I do have a question to Jessica, because one of the speakers yesterday did propose, self-efficacy as a way towards, or as a possible pathway towards post-traumatic growth. What are your thoughts on that?
I haven't actually researched that concept in relation to post-traumatic growth myself, so I wouldn't be best placed to give the most well-educated answer, but I'll answer it anyway. I think if you can build that up in yourself, in a similar manner to the other factors, to many other factors, it translates across. And if you can build up self-efficacy through whatever means, you will have greater belief in your ability to maybe connect with others. It's one of the things I researched, forming those connections, feeling confident in being able to go out. Some people even just leaving the house is a challenge. So if you can build up that self-efficacy first, and I imagine that would translate and bolster all the other factors. But yeah, I'm not an expert in that area, so do correct me if I'm wrong, anyone.
So one more question, and I have another question for Jonah. Jonah, did you watch Todd Kashdan's presentation today?
Unfortunately, I've been running around. I didn't have a chance.
Oh, okay. He was presenting on depression and suicide. I was just wondering what your thoughts of how your research sort of relates to his, but if you hadn't seen his presentation, it's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. But
oh, that's okay.
But recently, my research program has been focusing on purpose in life specifically, and I find it very powerful because purpose in life has been focusing on the approach, goal-directed behavior, like what you want to do, right? And so that kind of energizes people and gives you people motivation, whereas depression might characterize people in a static situation, like I don't want to do anything, I feel down, I feel low levels of energy, I am not interested in a lot of different things. So there is not a lot of momentum. So I've been investigating the role of purpose in life, and actually my dissertation looks at some interventions to promote purpose in life, and one of the outcome would be distress and suicide ideation. So I'll be interested to know how the results would show after the analysis. So
Great, thank you.
yeah, thanks for your question.
Hey, Jonah, just on that one, let's take the opportunity to jump in. Is suicidal ideation has gone up during the pandemic? That's correct, right?
I don't have a lot of data about this question. That's a great question.
Okay.
I am not sure, to be honest.
Oh, no, I was just curious because I was under the understanding, and again, this is not my field of expertise, but that suicidal ideation had gone up, but the actual level of suicides had not changed, and in some places it actually decreased, which was a curious juxtaposition.
Interesting. So the thoughts would be high, but the behaviors would not congruent with the thoughts. Yeah. That's interesting. I am not sure.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. Mm-hmm. I was curious with Adiba over in India. Because we have many members of INPM who are from India. Do you feel you're working isolated in your field, especially I know Dr. Wong has talked about, for example, a lot of journals don't like the idea that you can flourish in catastrophic times.
Yeah, there is a lot of cloud generally, but I do see that there is growing interest, and there are research groups that have kind of, created a niche. So we're getting there.
Okay.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, I think we're all in the same boat, actually.
Yeah.
Okay. And just checking. So I don't see any questions in any of the chat rooms. Did you have, I don't know, well, we can ask you, did you have any final words any of the speakers wanted to give to wrap this up? I don't want to put you on the spot or anything. Okay, well, we're coming up to the end of our time here. If there's no last minute things, I think we have your contact information that we can get hold of. We don't, yeah, and I think you've sent your PowerPoint to Daniel. Yeah, so that's good. Okay. Well, thanks to everybody and to our prize winners here for coming and talking to us about your research. And I guess we'll end the session and go off to the next one. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
The distance is too far when you're holding on to hope. Sing me a sad song over and over. I'll be alright by and by. Let me be consumed in a love divine to find where the treasure lies. I want to hear that small voice whisper to my forgotten soul. They say it's never too late to start again. What breaks your heart